First of our A2 ethics, we only have 3, which is nice to know. So we have meta-ethics, conscience, and sex and relationships. So as far as meta-ethics is concerned, I think this is a really good topic. I really like meta-ethics. Students don't like it. If you like this, you potentially can do extremely well in your exam because it's never one of the popular ones. As far as your boxes are concerned, I'm just going to put the slide up, then you can see how it works. So you've actually got 3 layers of boxes in that first section to fill out. So you've got your absolutism and relativism, you've then got the box separated underneath, and then the box separate underneath that one. So you've got 3 layers of boxes just as the slide looks on your sheet. And so you need to know about the different ethical standpoints, absolutism and relativism. Now, these are very common terms. You're used to these now. You're quite familiar with these. Natural law falls more into the absolutism, whereas something like act utilitarianism would be more relative to the situation that you're in. And so absolutism, morals are fixed, unchanging truths that everyone should always follow. Relativism, moral truths are not fixed and absolute. What is right changes according to the individual, situation, culture, time and place. Little box underneath. Relativism and absolutism do not disagree about what is moral. They disagree about what it means to make a moral statement. Now, don't forget meta-ethics. It's not about what you should and should not do. It is not about what is or is not right. It's about the language that you're using. So it's not that these 2 approaches disagree on what's moral. They disagree on how you assert a statement. Meta-ethics focuses upon language of ethics. It is concerned with whether moral statements refer to fixed truths, ethical absolutism, or are relative to emotions or beliefs. It is concerned with how we come to know morals, through senses, through observation, in intuitive knowledge, or whether ethics are not linked with knowledge at all. And so this is where our arguments come in. Does it believe that they are absolute? Does it believe that when we speak about morals, they are relative? How are we making these statements? What do we mean when we make these statements? Do we refer to fixed truths, or are we referring to an emotional response? So it's not about stating what is right or wrong or what you should and should not do, like all other ethical theories. All ethical theories are descriptive or prescriptive. They're normative. Normative is like your natural law and your Kant, because they're telling you what you should do. You should follow your duty. You should follow the primary precepts. You should follow agape. This is not saying what you should do. It's saying, what does it mean when we say doing your duty is good? What does that mean? This is very, very important. You need to establish this at the beginning of an essay. This goes hand in hand with your religious language, but obviously this is focused on ethical language. If you get a question in the exam, in your ethics paper, now we do talk about synoptic links. Be very careful making synoptic links to religious language. So, for example, bringing in verification, because an examiner probably will think you've just got confused, rather than you making links that are relevant for the question. So just be very, very careful. Whilst there's similarities, because they both look at language, they are arguing very different things, the religious or the ethical. So I would advise you to keep them separate in your exam. If you get a question in ethics or meta-ethics, stick with the arguments that we're going to do together. So that is your intuitionism, emotivism and ethical naturalism. The remainder of this side is going to be for ethical naturalism, so that's where we're going. So the large box underneath is going to be for ethical naturalism. This is our first argument. Ethical naturalism. Naturalism is an ethical theory that holds that everything arises from natural properties and causes. Thus, morals are fixed absolutes that can be observed as part of the universe. It is fixed, it's cognitive, it's absolute, it is fact. This arises from natural properties. And so naturalism arises from natural properties. Ethical because we're dealing with ethics. That's where the name comes from. F.H. Bradley is the name you need to know, and Philippa Foot also is mentioned within this topic area. I recommend you learn your names because you'll need something to plump these out with. They believe that morals can be perceived in the world in the same way that other features of the world are identified. What that means is you might recognise a feature of the world. For example, the world is a sphere and spins on an orbit. That is a feature of the world. That is a feature of how we identify the world. It might be that the sun rises and sets. That is a feature of the world. What they're arguing is that morals can be perceived in the same way. Morals, we mean ethics. They can be perceived in the same way as the argument that the earth is a sphere and it rotates on an orbit around the sun. Evil and good are absolute facts. Morals are not about your opinion, but objectively true. In other words, expressing a moral truth, which is part of the reality of the universe. It is therefore not an opinion. This is all very, very important. There are links to Aquinas' natural law and how morals and ethics can be seen within nature. So don't forget, Aquinas' natural law has the absolute elements within the primary precepts taken from these ideas of natural qualities. Bradley claims that morals are observable as part of the concrete world. We are moving into the next box for further explanation, but the words in bold are to help you remember these are absolute facts. They are objectively true. They are observable. So even if you disagree, you have to understand what it is it's arguing. It is saying that good and bad, right and wrong are facts. Facts that are experienced through the natural world. I think this is a clever argument, but it's not without its faults and its flaws. But keep your minds open at this point with what it is that it's saying. So when you make an expression of a moral truth, such as euthanasia is wrong, that is a moral truth. What this is arguing is that when a statement is made like that, it is not an opinion. It can be seen as objectively true, it can be seen as an absolute fact, and then where we're going on the next slide is when you find evidence to support it. So support what it is that you're saying. So you might actually find that euthanasia is right or is good based on the evidence that you find. But again, we'll have a look at it on the next slide. This argument stands alone, by the way. You don't have to apply it to euthanasia, you don't have to apply it to sex ethics or anything like that. This argument stands alone. You use the arguments against each other. So you don't have to apply. Excellent. Box underneath, again, looks slightly confusing, but you'll understand it when you see the slide. So that's how the boxes underneath look. Apologies. You've got the little box with the arrows coming from it into the box underneath. That is for the bits in red at the top. You've then got a thin box underneath that for the bit underneath the 3 bullet points at the bottom. You have to learn this structure. You don't have to learn this example. You can use a different example, and I recommend that you do. But you have to remember that ethical statements and non-ethical statements are the same. An ethical statement, when you're stating something as good, bad, right or wrong, that's an ethical statement. But statements about the world, so non-ethical, they're not to do with ethics, so facts about the world. This argument is saying that they are the same thing. So, for example, Hitler was the leader of the Nazis. That's a non-ethical statement. It's not no ethics. There's no good, bad, right and wrong in there. It's a fact. Saying Hitler was a bad man, bad, Good, bad, right, wrong. Those are the ethical words that you need to use, because use the word bad. That also is a fact, because you can use evidence, the consequences of actions, the personal attributes to back up that Hitler was a bad man, and that therefore becomes a fact as well. I highly recommend you give a different example in your exam. Why? Because everyone's going to give the Hitler example. As long as you're using the words good, bad, right or wrong, and as long as you can present the evidence to back it up. So students in the past have said things like John Lennon was a singer in the Beatles, well, John Lennon was a good man. And then they'd give the evidence of all the different things that he did, all the different charities, all the different songs, all the influences that he has had. Donald Trump's often a popular one, but it depends how you want to argue it. Underneath, ethical naturalism advocates the belief that a statement could only be factual and have meaning if it can be verified empirically. We can verify empirically, found true empirically with senses. We can verify empirically that Hitler was a bad man because we have the evidence of the concentration camps, we have the evidence of the death, we have all of the birth and death records. We have verifiable evidence that can be seen with senses, therefore it becomes fact. Ethical sentences express propositions. A proposition is a statement of truth. So ethical sentences express propositions. Propositions are made true by objective features of the world, independent of human opinion. So Hitler is a bad man, or Hitler was a bad man, is independent of human opinion. That is not open to judgment according to this argument, because you have enough evidence to back up what you are saying. So the 3 bullet points at the bottom just go into the box that's separated underneath. You should have 2 empty rows left, 3 boxes empty left. Is everybody okay up to this point? Because when we bring in David Hume's is-ought argument, then it gets slightly confusing. So you have to understand what this is saying to begin with. So has anyone got any questions with this argument? If you do, and if you get confused with the next bit, just let me know, because it seems difficult, but it really isn't. So it is easy once you get it, but as is most things. Fabulous. David Hume then, so this all goes in the box underneath. David Hume is the critic of ethical naturalism. Moral good and evil cannot be distinguished using reason. You cannot use reason to work out good and evil. We cannot move from an objective, factual statement based on observations of the world, so a fact, to a subjective moral statement. I'm going to put it all up there. Take your time writing it, then I'll explain more fully. So, a forensic person going to a crime scene would gather a man is dead. That is the facts based on the crime scene. They can verify the man is dead by feeling his pulse, and there is no pulse there. They cannot find no evidence from that of the wrongness of murder. They cannot then say it is wrong to murder from that and say that is a fact as well. There is one fact there and there is one opinion there. This led to Hume's law, does not imply ought. Now this is a very famous argument, very popular. It is often used against a lot of other ethical arguments as well, but we just bring it and use it here. Is are facts. So an is statement is a statement of fact. Hitler is the leader of the Nazi Party. Obviously, it's now past tense, so it becomes was. But Hitler is the leader of the Nazi Party, is as fact. That does not then imply you ought not kill. Hitler ought not kill. You cannot get that from the fact that he is the leader of the Nazi Party. You cannot take an ought of how you should behave from a fact. Is a fact ought to moral behaviour? No amount of fact is ever sufficient to lead to an ethical conclusion. And David Hume says this: "'Tis the object of feeling, not of reason. It lies in yourself, not in the objects," in a treatise of human nature. So basically he's saying that it's a feeling, not a fact. I'll let you write it down, then I'll explain it again. So, what Hume is arguing, I'll go it this way. Ethical naturalism is arguing that you have facts, and you can get from those facts, with enough evidence, with enough empirical verification, you can also make ethical statements into facts. So, euthanasia is legal in Switzerland. That is a fact. Euthanasia is legal in dignitas in Switzerland. Euthanasia is good. There is enough evidence then to back up that statement. There is enough evidence according to ethical naturalism to say euthanasia is good, going from the fact that it's also legal, and therefore both are factual statements. Euthanasia is legal in Switzerland, euthanasia is good. David Hume is saying, no way. Yes, one is a fact. Euthanasia is legal in Switzerland. You cannot get from that, though, the rightness or the wrongness of the act itself. One will always remain the moral behaviour. One will always remain the ethical standpoint, the opinion. That opinion, no matter how much evidence you have, will it ever become fact as well. There is a fact and there is an opinion. And no matter how much evidence you get, will that opinion ever become fact as well. That's what it's arguing. Is a fact ought to moral behaviour? No matter how much evidence you find, you can never make an ought behaviour into a fact as well. Does that make sense? We're not saying anything, so yes. I think you can. Alright, so let's bring in Ms. Foote. Philippa Foote, defender of ethical naturalism. That sounds very strong, actually. I don't think it sounds a bit like Braveheart. Philippa Foote, defender of ethical naturalism. She is a British naturalist philosopher. So, British naturalist philosopher Philippa Foote. What a mouthful, I have to say. Hello, I'm British naturalist philosopher Philippa Foote. She argued that when we call a person a just man or an honest woman, we are referring to something, some evidence to back this up. Virtues can be observed by watching how a person acts. So an honest person does honest things, and honest things can be observed. Therefore, what we are perceiving are moral absolutes. So she's arguing that when you call somebody an honest woman or a just man, these are facts, these are moral absolutes, these are not an opinion, because you are calling them that because you have evidence to back it up. Oops, apologies. In Natural Goddess, the fact that a human action or disposition is good of its kind is a fact about a given feature. That's actually a really good quote. The is has been added in the boxes because it's not part of the original quote. The 3 dots mean there was part of it taken out as well. But as a quote, you can learn that. Even if you just learn a fact about a given feature, what she's arguing is that an act that you do or a disposition is the sort of person you are facts about you, because there's enough observable evidence to back it up. So think about a way that somebody might describe you. Philippa Foote would argue that that is then an observable moral absolute, that is a fact. Don't forget we're talking about honest, just. We're not talking about a physical description, so we're talking about virtues here. So if a virtue like patience or just or something like that. So we're talking about virtuous behaviours, and therefore, because you have the evidence to back them up, they become moral absolutes. That all goes in the first of your two small boxes. Sorry, I wasn't very clear there. So your first of your two small boxes, because the example she gives goes in the box to the side. Philippa Foot used to be on the old spec when we used to do virtue ethics. Virtue ethics from Aristotle. It's such a shame they took out, I said this to you before as well, it's such a shame they took out virtue ethics because Aristotle's ethics are fantastic. Nicomachean ethics, very, very interesting, very good. And Philippa Foot was heavily influenced by Aristotle's virtue ethics. So this is where she comes from this angle. Box to the side is the example she gives. So this again goes in that last box on this side. You don't need to, and they're just questions at the bottom anyway, so you don't have to worry about those. You just need to summarise those 2 bullet points in that box, please. Foot draws upon writer Kropotkin's example of when an anthropologist goes to study the native Malayan people under the strict instructions never to take photographs of them. One night the anthropologist has the opportunity to take a picture when one of the natives is sleeping, but stops himself because of the promise he had made. And so she argues that such rules are natural and absolute. Humans have developed ways to live together and have developed rules to ensure everyone can live happily together. So she believes that because of that instinct he had to not take a photograph, even though he could get away with it, even though that's exactly what he wanted, because he'd made the promise-keeping fidelity, promise-keeping, because he'd made that promise, that is an absolute moral truth. It's a moral fact based on the evidence of when people have broke promises and bad things have happened, and when people have kept promises, good things have happened. So because of all of the evidence, that has then influenced this person to make that moral judgment, and because of that, it becomes a moral absolute. Not sure. Again, you can evaluate it in your exam though. The questions that we did underneath when we did it in class, we did have a look at who Philippa Foot was. We had a look at her link to virtue ethics, this idea of arete, which is excellent. Golden mean is about finding this middle ground in your behaviour, so never going to an excess or a deficiency. Vice is bad things, virtues, good things, and patterns of behaviour. This idea that you don't just become a mass murderer, it's about small behaviours that build up as you go along. So we had a look at those and how it influenced her arguments. As soon as you're ready, please turn over your sheets. Box at the top is going to be for weaknesses of ethical naturalism. We then move into intuitionism. There's a line about just under halfway down. That's to show where we bring in emotivism last of all. So we've got now intuitionism in the middle, then emotivism at the bottom. But the box at the top is for your weaknesses. So, weaknesses of ethical naturalism. Right and wrong are subjective, not objective. Objective is when they'll exist with or without human beings. So the word objective means that they would exist whether we existed or not. What the weakness is saying is, no, right and wrong exist because of humans, and therefore they're subjective to humans. They are not objective. You need humans to exist to determine how we should live. Regardless of whether a situation may have evidence to back it up or not, so for example euthanasia, it may still break the law. So you might be able to find endless amounts of information as to why euthanasia is right, all the evidence of, like we said, Switzerland, it's legal, doesn't matter. If you still euthanize somebody in this country, you break the law, you're going to jail. Therefore the argument itself is pointless. Because no matter how much evidence you find for something being right or wrong or good or bad, it still might break the law. Do ethical moral situations have evidence? Which evidence do you accept or ignore? So, for example, I said Hitler is a bad man. That then ignores the fact that he was loving to his girlfriend wife, that he loved animals and his dogs, that he got the award for bravery in the First World War because he was the go-between between different camps, passing on very, very important messages. I said in the example that John Lennon is a good man. John Lennon is known to have beaten his wife. And so are we ignoring that evidence against Hitler? Are we ignoring that evidence against John Lennon to argue that there's more evidence in support of it? So what evidence do you accept, what evidence do you ignore? Finally, Mackey argues that the rules themselves are not hard facts. They are accepted to varying degrees by all those inside the institution. So what that means is that you accept them when you're within that culture that use them, for example. So the rules are not set hard facts across everyone. They're not universal. They are accepted to varying degrees depending on where you are. So, for example, think of women's rights. Women's rights are very different in this country than they are in places like Saudi Arabia. The idea of how women should dress, for example. And so things like that, they are not hard facts. They differ from varying degrees depending on where you are. We then move into intuitionism. So we have two large boxes underneath. Both of these are going to be for G.E. Moore. We then have two skinny boxes, which are going to be one for Pritchard, one for Ross, and then evaluation again. So moving into now intuitionism. Intuitionism differs from ethical naturalism. G.E. Moore himself actually criticises ethical naturalism, and again we'll see why shortly. So first of the large boxes underneath, intuitionism from G.E. Moore. G.E. Moore believed that we should do the thing that causes most good to exist. Moral truths are indefinable, but self-evident through intuition. So you can't define them, but they are self-evident. They are evident within themselves because you just know them through intuition. Moore was particularly concerned with rejecting utilitarianism. He did not believe in utilitarianism. Use him against utilitarianism if you wish in your exam, which argued that goodness can be defined, quantified like in the hedonic calculus, and qualified like in the higher and lower pleasures. And so he's arguing that, especially arguments like utilitarianism that try to quantify and define goodness, he's saying you cannot do that. Goodness is indefinable. You just know it through intuition. And he gives the example, of course, of yellow. Good is a simple notion. This is what he calls it. Good is a simple notion. Just as yellow is a simple notion. You cannot break it down into easier or different qualities. So you know it when you see it. So many things can be broken down into different qualities. A dog, for example, can be broken down into an animal or a mammal, whereas good is just good. Yellow is just yellow. Goodness is indefinable like yellowness. We know what is yellow and we can recognise it, but we cannot actually define it or describe it. If somebody was blind and had never seen yellow, you might try and say, oh, it's bright. It's like the sun. Well, they're blind, they've never seen the sun. They don't know what bright or dark is. And so you just can't define it. There's no qualities that you can really captivate what it means by yellow, because yellow is a simple notion that cannot be broken down, just like goodness. You recognise them through intuition, but you cannot define them. You then have a quote from Principia Ethica, his book. If I am asked, what is good? My answer is that good is good, and that is the end of the matter. I like that. I think that's a really good quote to start an essay with. Even if you just quote, so you could say, G.E. Moore in Principia Ethica argues, good is good. How hard is that? We've got two words, well, three words, and one of them is the same. So good is good. That would be enough to then instigate your argument. What he means by this is that they are indefinable like yellowness. This argument disagrees with ethical naturalism, which says that ethical statements and facts are the same thing. This essay will discuss which argument is more effective, or whatever the word in the question might be. Very, very easy. Quotes really help to get over that initial, where do I start bump. Good is good. That's it. Simple notion, cannot be broken down. Box to the side then is for G.E. Moore continued. G.E. Moore continued the attempts, so this is the box to the side, continued the attempts to define good in terms of something that can be verified or falsified is to commit the naturalistic fallacy. So trying to define good in terms of verified or falsified. Verified, prove true, falsified, prove false. If you're trying to prove goodness as true or goodness as false, you commit the naturalistic fallacy. G.E. Moore was influenced by Hume's is-ought distinction. So this is very, very similar to Hume's argument. What Moore says is that you cannot identify goodness, which is an ethical statement. Somebody is good, that's an ethical statement, with a natural quality. Natural quality is a statement about the world. You cannot infer or take from a description of how the world is to how the world ought to be. So very, very similar to Hume's is-ought distinction. But the point of it is that G.E. Moore is once again trying to avoid ethical naturalism. So to avoid ethical naturalism, he creates his own argument, which is intuitionism. You cannot, in simple terms, what he's saying is you cannot take from the world a natural quality, how you then ought to behave, or an ethical statement. Ethical statements are known through intuition, not through taking them from fact. They cannot be verified or falsified, you can only know them through intuition. And he calls this the naturalistic fallacy. Those of you that remember your philosophy, a fallacy is a problem in logic. You absolutely have to Google that word if you're not familiar with the definition of fallacy. It might pop up in a philosophy exam. There are fallacies against the cosmological argument, the teleological argument presented by Hume, for example. So fallacy is there's an error in logic. The logic is that you can get an ought from an is. That's the fallacy. That's the problem that doesn't work. Naturalistic, because you're trying to get from a natural quality how ethical properties are therefore fact. The easiest way to deal with this one is to go back through and embed in your head easier alternative words. So when you see naturalistic fallacy, you might think, oh, that's awful, that's horrible. No, naturalistic, natural quality, natural world. Fallacy, a problem with logic. Break it down into simpler terms to help you deal with it. From here, we're going to the two boxes underneath. One is for Pritchard, one is for Ross, so you've got a nice box for each of them. So one box for each of the different bubbles. H.A. Pritchard built on Moore's work. He says reason collects the facts and intuition determines which course of action to follow. So reason helps you gather all the facts and information, and then your intuition helps you determine how you should behave, what you should do. He distinguished between general thinking and moral thinking. General thinking is your reasoning used to assess the facts. Moral thinking is the immediate intuition. So when you come to a moral dilemma, a friend comes up to you and says, I'm pregnant. I've got my exams coming up. It was a mistake. I'm too young to have a family. I can't afford to have a family. Should I have an abortion? The general thinking would be the reasoning. The general thinking would be weighing up all the facts of the situation. The facts are you can't afford it. The facts are you've got your exams. The facts are you're young. The facts are that you're not with the person. The moral thinking is your immediate intuition, what your gut instinct tells you. And so one is the reasoning, one is the immediate intuition. He recognised that different people have different intuitions about what is right. So he realises that intuitions are not set in stone as far as they're universally agreed. That person believes them as fact, that person believes their intuition is right, but they may differ from different people. Ross was Pritchard's student, so W.D. Ross was Pritchard's student. He says what is right is always unique depending on what is morally suitable in that situation for a person. never know all the facts of a situation, so you have to base your judgments on what is right on intuition. That's actually a really important point. What he's saying is you can never know all the facts. So that's a bit of a dig again to ethical naturalism, which says you need to find evidence to back up what you're saying. He's saying you can never find all the evidence, that instead you have to go on intuition. Obvious that certain types of actions are right, and he calls these prima facie duties. Things like fidelity, which is promise-keeping, reparation, which is when you've done something wrong, you try and repair it. Gratitude, justice, beneficence, which is helping others, self-improvement, and non-maleficence, don't be malicious. You don't have to remember all of the prima facie duties, but I recommend you learn 2 or 3. When these duties conflict, you follow what you think is right in that situation. So first sight duties. Now, there is an awful lot of information, there is an awful lot of content on the previous 3 slides. If you get a question on intuitionism, you have to evaluate this. You have to say how Pritchard develops More's arguments further. So Pritchard focuses on the 2 types of thinking, but all about that intuition again. One is reasoning, act comes from intuition though. Ross then develops it even further to say that certain things are just right through intuition, such as helping others and promise-keeping. But all are arguing this is based on intuition, not based on facts. But if you write all of this, you are not evaluating. You must say, does it work, does it not work? Do you think that you should make moral decisions based on intuition? Do you agree with his prima facie duties? Do you think it's possible to always help others and keep your promises? Think about what they're saying and then develop that into evaluation. Doing really well, everyone. I think this will be on your exam. They very, certainly on the old spec, they liked metaethics questions because it is quite bland. It's not like conscience or euthanasia application or business that you can get your teeth stuck into and weigh it up and use examples. It is quite, these are the arguments, use the arguments against each other and fabricate some evaluation. I mean, this isn't stuff that keeps you up at night, okay? But maybe having bad customer service might do. Okay, this is not stuff that you are going to get really passionate about. You have to find that passion and make it up in order to get the marks. But this, again, if done properly, you can get very, very good marks with it. However, you also have to be very careful. You need to make sure you keep your ethical naturalism, your intuitionism and your emotivism correct. If you start mixing up your names, getting the wrong words in the wrong place, it will really stand out. So you have to be sharp with this one. Final box for intuitionism is your weaknesses. I've only done weaknesses for these. There are, of course, strengths for the different arguments as well. More does not explain nor prove how we know good through intuition alone. What is intuition? What is it? Does everybody have it? How do you know good through it? How can you be sure your intuition is correct? And what happens if your intuitions conflict? So what happens if your own intuitions conflict? For example, somebody might be in hospital, but you also have to go to work. My intuition is saying, well, I need to go to work to pay my mortgage, but then I also need to go to hospital to see somebody that might be poorly. Your intuitions might conflict. What do you do? Which angle do you go? Which intuition do you choose between? Hitler's intuition told him that he wanted to make Germany strong again by wiping out people that were not contributing to society. How can we judge that his intuition wasn't correct? He believed it was correct. Again, how do we judge intuitions? J.L. Mackie once more argues that morality is not just about what a person believes is intuitively right. It's about doing something about it as well. It's not just about... So, for example, Pritchard avoids that problem because Pritchard's talking about the moral thinking as an action. Whereas what J.L. Mackie's arguing there is, it isn't just about an intuition. Oh, my intuition's telling me. No, it's about doing something about it. You have to act upon your intuition. Brilliant, we have 3 slides left. Large box is going to be for emotivism. You then box to the side, you're going to have C.L. Stevenson with a bit of Ayer underneath, and then finally your evaluation once more. These arguments all go against each other. You need to pick which team you're on. That'll then again help you in your evaluation and help you answer the exam question. Final section then, emotivism. This goes in the large box, please. A.J. Ayer, again, we know that he's part of the Vienna Circle. Ayer is the one that talks about the verification argument. He's part of the logical positivists. Positivism because they were moving away from religion into science. Logical because they're based on logic and reasoning. So Vienna Circle because they lived in Vienna. Nothing else creative about that. So A.J. Ayer was part of the Vienna Circle and drew upon the thinking of David Hume. Ayer believed that there are 3 types of statements: logical, factual and moral. Logical, analytical. Factual, synthetic. Synthetic is where you find evidence for something, so therefore it becomes fact because you found evidence for it to back it up. And moral. Emotivism is ethical non-naturalism because it rejects the views that morals tell you anything about the external world. Sorry, the timing's a bit off on this slide. It moves away from the claim that moral language has some kind of absolute meaning. So it isn't absolute. It's not absolute as far as ethical naturalism, that facts and moral statements can also be made into fact because of the evidence. That no, that's not the case. Your intuition is fact. No, that's not the case. It's moving away from absolute into relative. And so that's where that mouthful comes in. Emotivism is ethical non-naturalism. That sounds frightful. It isn't. Ethical, ethics, good, bad, right, wrong. Non-naturalism, naturalism is saying facts based on nature, and this is saying no, it's not fact. So basically it's ethics that are not fact. Relative ethics, that's all it's arguing. So it's arguing that ethics are not based on fact, they are based on something that is more relative. Morals are only relative to our feelings and emotions and therefore cannot be verified. Therefore, these tell us about the person, not the external world. So when somebody makes a statement, they are representing themselves, their feelings, their emotions. They are not stating something about the world. In other words, good, bad, right and wrong express approval or disapproval. You approve, yay, I like it. You disapprove, no, don't like it. This led to the boo, hurrah theory or boo, hooray theory. Basically, that's why it's only as one bullet point. He does talk about it for quite a long time. But it does exactly what it says in the name. Boo, you don't like it. No, boo, don't like it, don't do it. That's wrong, that's bad. Hooray, yay, that's good, I like that. All expressions of emotion. All feelings relative to you that cannot be verified by science or maths. Whereas intuitionism would argue that you get those feelings of boo-hurrah through intuition. Ethical naturalism would say that they become fact because you are backing it up with evidence to make that judgment. This is just saying it's an emotion. How are we feeling with this topic? Do we like it? Yeah? Yeah? Ish? Jade, are we not?
No,
Boo, hurrah!
No, I don't think it's that bad.
Not that bad, so somewhere in the middle. Are you judging that on intuition and emotion? So again, you get the idea. All right, box to the side, you're doing ever so well. We're nearly there with this one. C.L. Stevenson goes in the top bit, the bubble underneath goes in the bit underneath on the box. C.L. Stevenson looks very brooding and serious. He's interested in how moral statements are used and what results they are intended to produce. So when people say moral things, how are they using them and what are they expecting the response to be? Moral judgments contain an element that expresses an attitude relative to the fundamental belief and an element that seeks to persuade or influence others. Now that bullet point is very important. What he's saying is that when you say boo or hurrah to something, or yes or no, or good or bad, it isn't just an expression of an emotion. You're also trying to persuade or influence the person listening. So when you say, oh no, that's bad, you're not just expressing your emotion, you want them to go, oh really, you think so? Why is that? Oh yeah, maybe you're right. You're trying to persuade or influence them. So it's not just an expression of an attitude, it actually seeks to persuade or influence others. AJA then has this quote, there's a little bit underneath, so it depends how you wish to use your boxes. Aya in Language, Truth and Logic, thrilling book. He says, and the man who is ostensibly contradicting me is merely expressing his moral sentiments. So there is plainly no sense in asking which of us is in the right, for neither of us is asserting a genuine proposition. Now, it's a long quote. I always say to you, don't learn long quotes. However, paraphrase that, because what he is saying is important. What he's saying is that when you are with somebody that is just disagreeing with you until you're blue in the face, everything you say they just disagree and you're going round and round and round in circles. Why? Because there is no sense in asking which of you is right, because both of you are making an emotional statement. Neither of you is right, and therefore you need to just accept that neither of you is right. And so what he is arguing there is, because you are not asserting a genuine proposition is a statement of fact, analytic or synthetic, because it's not a fact, you therefore just have to accept that neither of you is right, and therefore you're going to have disagreements, agree to disagree. So it's not that one person is right and one person is wrong, because neither of you are right, because you are talking about morals. Abortion is right, abortion is wrong. Well, it's right because of this, it's wrong because of this, it's right because of this, it's wrong because of this. You can go round and round and round and round, and what he's arguing is neither of you are right. Neither of you are asserting a genuine proposition, and therefore you might as well just accept that they are saying an emotional response. Point at the bottom, Aya saw disagreements as arguments based on preference. I prefer abortion, someone else might prefer that abortion not be legal, and so it's based on preference, whereas Stevenson saw them as arguments based on different beliefs. I believe abortion is wrong because of a Christian background. Someone might believe abortion is right because their sister was raped and needed one, whatever it might be. So one sees it as preferences, one sees it as a belief. Preference is what you prefer, belief because you have something to back it up. Again, which one do you see it as? Just pick a side and argue it.
And use the quote Aya, or is it?
Oh, the quote's Aya, yes, correct. Bless you. In your exam, it doesn't matter what examples you give for meta-ethics. As I said, you don't have to link it to euthanasia, business or sex ethics. So you can link it to any example that you wish. If you want to keep it within those realms, that's fine. But the examiners are not expecting you to make links across. This is not a synoptic links topic. This isn't one like natural law where you might have to link to sex ethics. This is not one of those. This is a standalone topic. So use any examples that you want to. Final box, final slide is for the evaluation of emotivism. The strengths are that it's part of human nature to express emotions, especially in moral situations. In moral situations, you respond emotionally. Everyone can understand the theory. It's not a hard theory to understand. Everybody has emotions. Everyone's opinions are equally valid. However, problem with that is when everyone's opinions are equally valid, it just means you go around again in circles. You never actually get to a point if everyone's view is valid. Problems. Ethics based on attitudes, upbringing, feelings just lead emotivism to being subjectivism. Is it even an argument? Oh, it's just subjective to what you think. Oh, it's just subjective to your upbringing. No, it's just subjective to your culture. You don't actually get anywhere. But then again, that's what meta-ethics is. It's about what's the language mean, not about getting you somewhere. James Rachels points out that moral judgments appeal to reasoning, not just expressions of feelings. So what James Rachels is arguing is you need to have reason in there as well, not just a feeling. And finally, Alistair McIntyre questions Stevenson's views about how moral views are actually formed in the first place. How do you actually make moral decisions? He calls emotivism opaque, see-through, vacuous. It does not give any help in explaining how we can distinguish the feelings and attitudes that are moral from those feelings and attitudes that we might have. So how do you again decide which ones are moral and which ones aren't? All in that final box, please. Are there any questions? Done really well there, everybody. Well done.